Welcome to the Procurement Pulse. My name is Evan and I'm here with Tiffany Bray. Tiffany is an expert in vendor management and compliance in the financial sector. I'm going to pass it over to Friddy, who's going to dive into her background and insights.
Hey Tiffany, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I think I don't want to go through much through your background, and we'll have your LinkedIn so people can find you at the end, but really just want to jump right in and
Great.
kind of see what you can teach us today about third-party risk management. What is it? Why is it important? And really what can companies learn from embracing it?
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, thank you. I mean, really, third party risk, when you think about it, is understanding who you're doing business with, right? And that can be on a small scale or a large scale. And really, everyone, if you think about it, even if you're not in a corporate setting, has vendors, right? So whether you're thinking at home, whether it's your nanny, your lawn care, everyone has a vendor that they do business with. And you want to be able to trust them. You want to be able to know their companies more than just their surface facing. And especially if you're letting them into, let's just say, your private home, you want to make sure they're safe. So transfer that into corporate. You want to make sure when you're having a vendor come into your business that they're safe.
Perfect. If you were to say, what's one third-party risk that most companies overlook that keeps you up at night?
I think a lot of companies overlook doing a simple possible Google search, right? You can maybe find out that the company is currently right now in negotiations of a huge, right? I think just doing that surface level kind of work, you don't have to spend millions or even hundreds of thousands sometimes to get a background of a company. You can do that yourself. And a lot of companies overlook that sometimes.
Yeah. And really mapping out that third-party risk management, right? What does it all entail? What does it touch, right? From software exposure, right? Where do you let your vendors into your systems to should you go single source, multi-source, geopolitically? And those are just that I know. I'm sure there's a lot more. What does third-party risk management touch within an organization?
Everything, right? So you can even look at reputational risk, right? When a vendor comes in to your company, sometimes represents your company from the customer's point of view. So when that company misperforms or they get breaches, that's a reputation on your direct company. You can look at compliance risk. Are they staying compliant with regulations? If they're touching your data, processing it in any way, looking at your customers' information, you need to make sure that they're also in touch with their cybersecurity and that they're doing penetration testing, making sure that they're protecting not only their own company, but now your data too.
What are some of the worst examples where you have seen risk management go wrong? And what has been the consequences or the failure points?
Right. I think when there was a breach about back with Volkswagen when they had a company that stored their customer data. So it was like a data repository kind of company. They stopped doing business with them, but that company still had their data. And it was 10 years worth of customer history data. And that company got a breach. And without knowing that that company was in their past category and catalog of vendors, their actual customer data got breached and penetrated because that company, right, got breached. And Volkswagen was not prepared for that. It wasn't on their forefront. They never got any type of data destruction certification or anything because they didn't really, I think, pay attention to that past vendor. It was a very large breach situation, a huge case study. And I think really paying attention to who has your data. When you stop doing business with that vendor, what does your exit strategy look like? And you have to execute that as well, and making sure that whether you have a couple of years or whatever your duration of data repository with that company, but making sure you go back and follow up after those years expire.
Right, and I think that's a super important point. I mean, having worked in supply chain myself, I think everybody's aware of risk management upfront and during the onboarding and while you work with vendors. But I don't think I've ever realized and thought about, right, the risk that you might still have after you've done working with a vendor. You've moved on, you're not communicating with them anymore, but they're still there. So yeah, I think that's super relevant, and I would guess that's something a lot of companies overlook, right? Don't have a good offboarding process or that full vendor lifecycle management. I feel like that last portion gets overlooked a lot. It's kind of out of sight, out of mind. They're not working with somebody anymore, and then still having that exposure and that risk in mind is something where I would guess that a lot of companies fall short.
They do. Yes, they do. A lot of companies will have a whole framework implemented. And even though they will, maybe draft a policy about offboarding, will they execute on it? And also, too, how far are they going with the offboarding? Is it just a click of a button to where you just delete? Or is it that you're actually checking on your offboard vendors, maybe frequently? And it could be where you're down the road and you might not even have had any data sharing, but the public associates that vendor with you, your company. And so if they have an issue, they may associate that with your company. And so you may need to get documents out or get communication out to your clients and reassure them that you have no ties, you have no business relationship, our customers are protected, things just to reassure them, so you can kind of kill all assumptions with your customers. But some people don't have the full exit strategy and even really know what that looks like.
And you come from a banking background, which is highly regulated, and I think risk mitigation is taken very, very seriously and is probably one of the most advanced industries when it comes down to third-party risk mitigation. What do you think is some of the other industries they could learn from the banking industry, and what do you think is something that you do better than most other industries? The high regulations you have in banking and kind of the hoops you have to jump through with the regulatory bodies, and you probably have a very advanced third-party risk mitigation process and tools and systems you're using that a lot of other industries could learn from.
Right. Yeah. With the banking industry, I mean, we have more strict regulation and a guidance that we have to follow, right? There's no blueprint to your framework, unfortunately, but there is a guidance and there's a lot of gray area in that guidance. And so you have to tailor your framework to work for your company. And that's across the board in the banking industry. And, while it seems to be a universal kind of step and flow and workflow and things that all kind of larger or mid-sized banks may follow, there's still very personalized frameworks that are geared towards each company and the structure of each company. So when you're thinking about outside of the banking world, you have to think about the possible risk exposures that may come with each industry. And so for the banking world, I mean, most importantly, it's the dollar, right? And also the customer data. And so because we hold such critical and restrictive customer data, we have to make sure our framework and our workflows are kind of like clad tight. And so that's really the difference, right? If you're in an industry where you're not really storing data or processing customers' information, you might have a little bit more lenient kind of framework and maybe even no guidance that you would have to follow from a regulator perspective. But just as good practice, you should.
Yeah, I'm aware. Just down the road from where we are here in Huntsville, we have a big aluminum can manufacturer, and they had a strike, and aluminum prices were going up just after COVID or during COVID, and all of a sudden Budweiser wasn't getting aluminum cans anymore. So Budweiser had to go to bottle cans and the aluminum bottles. So because the aluminum cans, they all come, or 50%, I think I looked it up,
Wow.
come from that organization, and the biggest plant is here in Alabama. And when they had a strike and they had a shortage on aluminum, Budweiser wasn't getting aluminum anymore. And now somebody I talked to there, that the Budweiser CFO actually came down and visited in person, right?
Oh.
And if the Budweiser CFO comes down and wants to talk to you, you have
Right.
a problem.
You have a big problem. And if you're losing a customer like Budweiser, you may want to rethink your collective bargaining with whether it's union or your workers and their strike demands. You got to weigh the options. Is it worth, losing a customer like Budweiser over maybe just a few maybe dollars increase of hourly wage or salary with your workers? And so you have to, think about, is the company folding really worth fighting with your labor staff? But that gets into a lot of
right. And I think on the flip side, Budweiser realized how reliant they were on this one company for their aluminum cans. And while they had, I think, penalty clauses in the contract, right, that could cost a lot of money in the end if Budweiser doesn't have cans, getting the money there, that's like you said, it's a reputational hit and damage for Budweiser as well if they aren't able to get the product out, and getting the money from the vendor probably doesn't offset.
Right. Well, that's a good point you make too, though, because Budweiser maybe didn't realize how critical of a vendor the aluminum company was. And when you have a critical vendor like that, to where you're heavily dependent on them for business production and output, you need to have a business continuity plan in place. And that needs to be a full circle, right? Continuity plan. And they probably didn't think of a company such as Aluminum Can Company as to, if they stop producing or if they halt production, then what? Where's our backup company? Where is it coming from? What country are we now talking about? How fast can we switch over production or shipping? So I don't think Budweiser kind of planned for that. And that was kind of poor on Budweiser, in fact, to where if there isn't another company, or if they haven't had another company procured, but as a backup more say, then they didn't have a full-blown business continuity plan.
Yeah, and I think that's something a lot of companies learned during and after COVID, right? When the supply chain just got thrown into disarray, and really a lot of companies realized that they are single source on a lot of critical vendors. And if China is shut down due to COVID or now tariffs, I think risk mitigation just has been pushed in the forefront, right? For making sure that we really maybe don't just source out of one region, but we really should have two regions in case something happens in region A, right? And really we can't be single source on critical components. Yeah. And right, do we have to have a second, third, maybe even, right? How far do we go down, and how much do we qualify and split up our volume, right? In the end, I think a lot of companies did it that way, because the more volume you give to a vendor, the lower your cost is. But on the flip side, right, if then that vendor has issues that might even be out of their control, that can certainly come back to bite you. So I think there's a lot of risk mitigation, I feel like, in general, just has become such a bigger part because of the uncertainty that we have, right? And I'm sure there's a lot of processes and a lot of tools that can be utilized to help with that. Are you familiar? Do you have any? How does that work in the banking industry? Do you have any? Is there a tool that kind of manages that for you, or do you kind of just run out of your Google Docs document? How does that work?
I mean, I think everyone kind of in the banking world has procured some type of assistance, whether it's a full ERP system, whether it's something just to categorize vendors or help with Forex, fees. Or I think every company has had some kind of interaction with a third-party vendor type platform. It's a matter of how much involved you want to be with a company and your budget too. As far as AI goes, there are a lot of AI companies that are out there. I have talked to a lot at some conferences and vendor expos. I have not yet been with a company that has fully invested into getting a AI type of third-party risk company involved, right? I've heard the demos, I've heard the pitches, been to the summits, but also this is also a new thing too. So just think about maybe a year ago, it wasn't very talked about as far as coming into third-party risk world and actually assessing vendors, making decisions, risk tiering, things like that. So given that it's also new also in the future, I probably will maybe either be with a company or partner with a vendor to work in the consulting firm. But the decision-making about the AI and how it's learning, kind of stepping outside of the AI field, is every vendor is so different, and every situation with the vendor is different. And so when you think about AI, can that AI navigate in that gray area? And will it have the knowledge and understanding on when to ask a secondary probing question or a third probing question to get to the outcome of making a decision? So I think the teaching of the AI still may not be fully mature yet. I think it hasn't mastered that gray area. So it's still kind of interesting how the companies are still selling it, but fully not having that guarantee of it.
Yeah, and I think when I picture it, right, and I've worked in SAP and Oracle, I feel like it's more of a document repository than it is really giving you guidance on vendor risk mitigation. If I'm picturing an AI tool, I would think it's more so asking you the right questions. Hey, right, have you thought about the size of the vendor, right? If it's a small company having and you are the majority customer for them and you make up 70-80% of their business, right? When I'm picturing an AI compliance or AI risk tool, I'm more so hoping for almost like a teacher, right? For somebody who understands the end-to-end risk mitigation and then guides you through the process and says, okay, like you said, right, we're not working with that vendor anymore, but here's still risk. Have you seen and considered those risks, right? I feel like some of the ERP systems, they're more so, okay, you can store your documents here, and they might have 1 or 2 steps where you say, okay, upload your vendor onboarding form here, but it's not really giving you much guidance on where you could be exposed, right? So what I would be hoping for in an AI tool is really that guiding of the process, or maybe, right, somebody has told or taught the AI what a end-to-end risk framework looks like and what all goes into it, and then AI is smart enough to apply that to your organization and say, okay, you're in banking, you're in mining, you're in e-commerce, right? What are the risks you should be thinking about?
Right, yeah, but those companies, before they procure that type of AI system, I mean, I'm sure they already have their risk appetite set in place. They already have their potential risk exposures, risk acceptance kind of policies written out. I hear you on your desire for a AI tool, and it almost sounds like the AI would be doing like the inherent questionnaire, like the initial kind of intake of the vendor. And then how different would that really be with what that company is already doing? Now, if they're not mature, that's one thing. If they don't have a mature framework, and if they don't know what they don't know,
And
internally.
I think that's a lot of companies. I've worked in companies that didn't know and where risk mitigation really wasn't an issue or even thought about. It was just, where do we get the lowest cost, right? I think there's a lot of industries that are very immature when it comes to risk management and really don't know what they don't know. And I
Right.
feel like, right, in a lot of organizations where I've been, it's seen kind of as like a tedious task, as something you have to do. But do you see any opportunity where risk management can become a competitive advantage as well, where companies that are doing it and that are good at it have an advantage over other organizations, not only in times when things go bad, but maybe even in times when business is normal?
I do. I think that it's a great selling tool to customers too, that we know we're protecting your data versus just saying it. And you can actually prove by examples, show partners that you're working with, whether that's, individual consultants, or if you're hiring full AI companies, you can explain how this is helping. I do think that being protected supersedes your reaction to a situation, but you have to be vocal about it, and you have to make sure you are being reactive, and how to put that into a marketing tactic for your potential customers.
Yeah, I do think that makes a lot of sense, right? Being able to, right, prove to potential customers that you're reliable, and right, it could be on the data side, it could be on the delivery side, right, where you're saying, hey, even if something happens, you're still getting your product, your data isn't being stolen, and right, when everything else is equal, can definitely be a deciding factor, right, why somebody
Yeah.
would work with you. So
Yeah.
I think that's
Yeah.
a very good point.
Yeah. If you don't have your policies in place about, even business continuity, like we talked about, having that in place to where you can show your customer base that if something were to happen, we have a backup plan, we have a backup vendor. We're not putting all of our eggs in this one vendor. Having that to show can also help you when the trust over, like you said, when the playing field turns equal. It's how much better can this vendor or company perform given a, environmental, political, natural situation that may happen. People want to make sure that business continues and they still get their output that they're paying for or desire. Yeah, I think having your policies in place, companies that are not at that mature level to where they don't have the policies in place, I mean, sometimes that's going to hurt them in the end. And also when you want to work sometimes like governmental, kind of contracts and entities, you have to have certain documentation in place when you go to submit, requests for bids and things like that. Kind of having those documentations already ready and policies, procedures will help you in either the near or future when you do need to display them. Nobody wants to see just documents dated yesterday either. They want to make sure that you have years of knowledge and experience, that you know what to do, when to do.
Yeah, and I think like connecting that portion of supply chain and vendor management to your sales and marketing department is something where I would I think a lot of companies don't realize the value they could have by equipping their sales org and their marketing team with the information on what procurement is doing to make sure that continuity is given, that data is protected, and for your team to have that as in their sales bag, right, of arguments of why somebody should work with them. Really, I think it kind of becomes a core business strategy, right? That not just a tedious task I have to do to comply with regulations or to comply with company regulations, right? Where I have to upload those documents in here, but something that can actually be used for, like you said, to grow the business and to differentiate yourself from other organizations.
Right, right. And if a company is not having a separate, let's just say procurement or third party risk or even sourcing kind of department, then you can bunch it all together. You just have to have that knowledge, right? Your employees have to have that knowledge. They have to know kind of what's going on and how to navigate through procuring an actual vendor and getting them to that onboarding stage, and then through the life cycle and offboarding. But you definitely need to have some type of procurement factor in there, or else you really are doing yourself an injustice before you even sign a contract.
Well, I think that was great. I appreciate you joining us today. And Evan, I'll let you do the outro.
Yeah, Tiffany, thank you so much. We really
Thank
appreciate
you.
your insights you can give us. I did hear that you have a new venture coming up. I'd love to, let our viewers know what your next step is and what you're moving on to.
I do, yeah. I'm having some educational consulting and some in-operation consulting too. So the companies like we talked about that may not be mature and may not have that placement for a full-time role, they could bring me on board, hire me, and I can do the educational format of your framework, kind of examine what you already have in place, look to enhance that or create new. If you're looking for a new vendor platform, we can run through demos together, look at what is required for your company and what you would need. And I can be that input for that vendor kind of presentation, demo day, and also just consulting, right? If you do want to do fractional type of TPRM role, open to that as well, but looking to help these companies get to that mature level.
Yeah, excellent. And
Thank you.
I want to ask, where could they find you? Is there a central link, socials that these companies could look you up on?
Yes, they can. LinkedIn, my name on there is Tiffany Bray. You can find me. I'm probably the only one in Tampa, Florida here, but I will have information on there on how you can reach me. Send me a message and we can chat there.
Excellent. Yeah, and we will link Tiffany's LinkedIn into the podcast so you can find her information right there. And yeah, Tiffany,
Thank
thank you
you.
so much.